Hello, and welcome to the Stand Still podcast. This is an opportunity to hit pause on your busy life as we hear from guests that will inspire you.
Hey Josh, how you going?
Hey Jay, doing well?
That's good. I'm not sure what episode number we're actually up to, but we're slowly ticking along. I think we're up to
episode 6.
Yeah, episode 6. That sounds about right. We have to apologise to all our listeners out there. Obviously, this is a real COVID-19 podcast, doing it over Zoom with some of the restrictions.
Definitely a bit different, especially when you don't live too far away from each other. But we've got some good content to talk about today and some interesting discussion points.
Yeah, no, we've got, as most people would know, is they've clicked on our podcast for this episode. We've got Partridge on looking at some of the concepts of wilderness and meditation and a whole bunch of, I guess, topics which relate to our whole Standstill podcast theme. So, yeah, it should be good. Do you have any initial thoughts at all, Josh?
He talked a little bit about it a study weekend recently, which had some really good thoughts and things to think about, especially related to Standstill, and I'm looking forward to chatting to him a bit more about it.
Yeah, sounds good. Maybe you can pull on some of those points he mentioned in the class and we can talk about it a little bit more.
Yeah, it should be quite good.
Right, we'll just jump on into our episode with Des. Well, thanks, Des, once again, as we've just said before our recording just started. Thanks for getting involved in our podcast. I don't know if you've heard any about podcasts that we've had before, but this is the first time Josh and I have been on Zoom, so we're experiencing, I guess, our first taste of proper lockdown here in Adelaide. I'm sure you guys are doing it a little bit tougher in Sydney, so thanks again for getting involved.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
On a completely different tone, and it's the listener's favourite, is the 23 rapid fire questions. Now, I don't know if you've heard them before, but we've got a really, some would say corny, we say professional, or just say intro.
Okay, I'm completely unprepared, so fire away.
Rapid fire questions heading your way. 23 questions coming today.
Question 1. Describe yourself in a hashtag.
Oh boy. Kiwi.
What's one thing people don't know about you?
White eyelashes.
What's one thing you do every morning without fail?
Drink coffee.
How do you unwind?
I don't. I used to play FIFA football. I don't have any way of doing it anymore.
Window or aisle seat?
Aisle, because I'm 6'5".
Your favourite app?
WhatsApp.
The most adventurous thing you've done in your life?
Have children.
Dark chocolate or milk chocolate?
Dark.
Stairs or elevator?
Stairs. You'll live longer.
Summer or winter?
Summer. That's why I moved to Australia.
That's fair, cool. If you could master one instrument, what would it be?
Piano.
A skill you're working on mastering?
Spanish.
What is your favourite country to visit?
Spain, funnily enough.
Favourite way to exercise?
Probably running and surfing.
Favourite food?
A barbecue bacon double cheeseburger from Burger King in New Zealand, which is better than Hungry Jack's.
Wow, that sounds like you've been thinking about that one for a while.
I have been, yes.
Scariest thing you've ever done?
I actually don't know. I flew in an old DC-3 airplane, which was a bucket of rust when I was at high school when we all thought we were going to die. So that's probably the enduring one that sticks to mind.
Do you have any nicknames?
Mondi. There's probably the only one I'll mention on video.
Cats or dogs?
Both, but I have dogs at the moment.
And the last one on a spiritual related tone. What is one thing you're looking forward to in the kingdom?
I would love to be an ambassador for Christ and to be able to come back to convince people of the need to go to Jerusalem to worship, but to come back to people that I have a relationship with at the moment. So like workmates and neighbours and stuff like that. And yeah, that would be something that'd be pretty special to me.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a good one. Actually, that is one thing that I actually have thought about before, is how my work colleagues will perceive me when Christ, like it's always someone a speaker talks about when they say, oh, you know, when Christ returns, will your colleagues and people out there actually know that for you now? And I'm like the few people that I talk to now, they know I'm a Christian and whatnot, but I think that'll still be a really weird moment for them, because I think even I've got Christian work colleagues, and I think I would be slightly, you know, if it was the other way around, I think I'd be quite confused if that was the case.
Yeah, sure. It's always a good test to apply. Like, would they be surprised if I turned up and, you know, was immortal and telling them about my religious beliefs? And I think the majority of my work colleagues would no longer be surprised because I'm fairly noisy about it. There'll be a lot of "I told you so, you should have listened to me" going on, hopefully.
Vindictive, or is that the word? Vindictive preaching?
I'm not sure if a vindictive immortal being exists, but maybe I'll be the first one. So we'll find out.
One of the things that Josh and I, and going through the whole Stand Still podcast journey, you could say, is we've talked on a whole bunch of different, I guess, topics, but what we've really found is that each person has, I guess, it's funny, every person's had their own concept and their own idea on what the Stand Still concept means to them. And when Josh mentioned, you brought up a few things that study weekend, we really wanted to capture some of those thoughts that you talked about earlier. So I guess just to open off the bat, and it's all yours really, but I guess what does the whole Stand Still concept mean to you in just that context of meditation and I guess pausing and considering?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for asking. It's speaking from my experience, it's something I've been battling with a little bit for probably 1 or 2 years, because when you're a young person, and I'm 35, so I don't really qualify anymore, but I remember hearing a lot of talks about the importance of meditation and making time for God in your daily life and all that kind of thing. And I've said that stuff myself in studies before. And I was preparing some thoughts on meditation and like how the brain works about neuroplasticity for study weekend and stuff. And I remember sitting there thinking, what do I actually do in terms of being able to stand still and just pause and take a bit of time? And I realized that it's almost impossible for me at the moment, that with the whole lockdown situation that's been going since last year. And the reason I really got thinking about it is because I heard a lot of people saying, you know, COVID's given us the ability to slow down our lives and to really make time for God. And that, to be honest, hasn't really been my experience. And that's not a bad thing either, by the way. I mean, the reason I haven't had time to slow down is because I've been spending just about every hour of every day with the family at home, which is a lot of fun. It's quite different when you're trying to work from home and trying to get stuff done. But it's been a really special time because in that 18-month period, we had one child before that, but we've now got another little one, and it's just an awesome time to be basically spending every day of the week at home with the family. But when you're trying to work as well, there's just no real downtime, because by the time you put the kids to bed, you had it and you're just about ready to go to bed yourself. And that's why I was hearing other people anecdotally saying, oh, it's been great, we've been able to slow down, we've been able to make time for God. And my experience has been quite different. So that's how I tried to approach my thoughts and my studies at study weekend, because when you've got so much happening in your life, you've got a busy job, you've got family life, there's still ecclesial stuff going on, it's actually really difficult to be able to do what the biblical characters did, and to get outside and to give yourself an hour or 2 hours of time alone. Like, it doesn't really, if there's any young parents listening to this, you probably know where I'm coming from. And the battle is that when you're younger, like when I was 20, when I was at university, I had so much spare time up my sleeve, but I didn't know it because that's just the life you're used to. So the paradox is kind of when you've got the most time in the world, you don't know it and you tend to waste it. And when you're older and you've got a lot more commitments, you know, you've really got to work hard to find that spare time, and it's just so fleeting. So for me, I was trying to figure out, I can't feasibly set aside 1 hour a day to just do nothing and to meditate. It'll be fantastic, but I just can't really find that time. So I have to think of other little ways that I can try and make time for God. And that's kind of where I ended up in my thinking about it.
Yeah, and I know that even with myself, it's been something I've been, especially since we've been doing the podcast, that it's got me thinking a lot more. And sometimes I actually, or quite often, I feel very similar to you, although I feel quite bad because I'm not even a parent or anything, and I'm like, why am I sort of struggling to, spend or allocate a certain amount of time for either, whether it's just reading or prayer or whatever things like that, or even just thinking about God. And I think part of it also is because there's so many things in life that are, I guess, geared towards grabbing your attention, even if just for a moment. Like you click on Instagram or something, and suddenly it's like a 10 or 15 minute time warp that you sort of enter into, and suddenly that time just sort of vanishes, and oh man, where did that go? Whereas to sort of grab that time and sort of spend it in a positive way is, I guess, the challenge to sort of make time for that, or be deliberate about it.
Yeah, exactly. Funnily enough, today I did get out for an hour. I went for a walk with my brother-in-law, and we were chatting away most of the walk. But I was thinking on the drive there about, I can't even remember the book, which is annoying because I like to try and mention sources. But a while ago, I was reading a book about parenting. And one of the things that it said is that it's really important for children to be bored. And you think, well, that's really weird. Like, what child wants to, I mean, I don't want to torture my child with boredom. But the reason why that's important is it's a really big part of their development and using their imagination and increasing their creativity and all that kind of thing. And the more I got thinking about that, I was like, it is actually good to be bored, because when you're bored, your mind wanders, and that's when you get time just to mull things over and think about stuff. And that's kind of what meditation is, or at least to me, I imagine that's how David meditated, because he's out in the fields, and when there's not a bear or a lion hopefully coming across to attack him and kind of give him something to do, he's probably doing a lot of like just sitting around and thinking and being a bit bored and meditating on stuff. And it's really important for kids to do that, to, stimulate their creativity and their imagination. But for young people and adults, we have lots of stuff to distract us. And so it's actually, I don't think there would be that much time where we're sitting around bored, because even in Sydney, back in the day when we used to catch trains to places, you'd be sitting on the train platform, an ideal space where you're stuck for 10 or 15 minutes. Actually, in Sydney, it's more like 40 minutes, but you're sitting there with nothing to do. That's a great time to just gaze into the middle distance and think, whatever it's about, whether it's about the stuff you've got happening or your relationship or, God and scripture. But what do? We flick out our phone and we fill that time with nothing. And so we're actually not bored that often. And I think it doesn't allow you the time to just sit and gaze into the middle distance. And that's not a problem our parents had, right? Because they didn't have, unless they were carrying around the newspaper, they didn't have all those instant distractions. But if you're stuck somewhere for an hour and you've got a mobile phone, you can 100% fill your head with stuff for that 1 hour. And you might think you're bored, but you're not actually allowing your mind to dwell on anything. You're just flipping from one thing to the other. And I think that's a challenge. And I'm not having a go at technology, because I get really annoyed when, we just get old people raving about technology. I mean, myself as old there. I mean, because we're having this conversation because of technology, but it doesn't allow us to meditate. It just steals away any spare time that we might have. And that, I think, is a really big challenge to overcome.
I've actually we found, I guess, doing the podcast, and we gave the challenge on the first episode about finding, I guess, a consistent chunk of time where you can sort of do that mindfulness and that, I guess, meditation time But I think we've quickly found that even setting a challenge, you don't often actually find those periods of time to just, in an ideal setting, sit in a park or just find those moments where you can stare up into the stars and just think about it. I guess that's why it's the beauty of a camp or, School of the Prophets, because you can do those moments. But something that I've found more personally that I've experienced is just more those small moments during the day where just it's sometimes even as short as a fleeting moment where I just try to be a little bit more God conscious, or just be a little bit more aware of the presence of God in my life. Do you find that it's maybe more important to, I guess, just use smaller moments, or for the lack of not being able to, I guess, find those big chunks of consistent time?
Yeah, I probably have two answers for that, which are both opposite. For me, at my stage of life, I have to seize the small moments because I find it hard, as I said, to find those 1 or 2 hours. So I think to the younger me, I would probably say find 1 or 2 hours minimum a week and go outside or go somewhere away from people. And the reason I say that is because when you look at the word meditation and where it appears in the Old Testament, I'm going to try and make sure I get the word right. I can't remember off the top. I think it's the Hebrew word hagar. I'll find it. I'm quickly scrolling through some old notes. But that, it is. It's the word hagar, and it actually means to mutter or to murmur to yourself. And the way it's used, particularly in the Psalms, is the idea of someone talking out loud to themselves about something. And I'm not saying all meditation has to be done that way, but when you look at how that word appears in the Old Testament and also in the New Testament, it's like you're reciting something to yourself, whether that's a prayer or you're just talking out loud. So I got the impression that if I was really going to do biblical meditation, I kind of need to be out in nature, talking to myself about scripture or about God or whatever. And that's certainly how a lot of David's Psalms read. And that's kind of hard to do when you're sitting on the train because people think you're a bit of a madman. You can't really do it, walking down the street. So to the younger me, I would say, make that time to get out and try and meditate biblically the way people did in scripture. But for me, here and now, there has to be fleeting moments. So you want it to be practical because otherwise you just forget about it. So one strategy I came up with is as simple as it sounds. I tried to make a commitment to myself that whenever I'd open my phone when I was on the train platform or wherever, before I did anything else, I'd open up a website, and I chose the Tidings website, tidings.org. It's an American Christadelphian magazine. And I'd read one article from the Tidings magazine before I did anything else on my mobile, whether I was opening up Instagram or other garbage, basically. And I'm happy to say that I've broadly failed to do that, but it did have a short impact, like a good impact in the meantime. Like I haven't really, I've tried to cut down phone usage in general, but that was one little thing I tried to do, and it worked. It worked in the initially, but unfortunately I haven't kept it up, and it's, I suppose, good to remind myself of it. But that was one little strategy. Like before I do anything else, I need to open up the Tidings thing. I'm going to get something useful out of this 5 minutes I'm about to waste on my phone. So fleeting moments were quite important, but I think you need to make them quite practical because otherwise, unfortunately, you do it for a couple of weeks and then it disappears. So the other thing I did is I deleted, I've got two phones, unfortunately, a work phone and a personal one. I deleted all social media off my personal phone. So I can't really waste time that way. And if I'm out somewhere with only that phone, then it's the Tidings website that I have to look at first.
That Tidings website is actually looks pretty great the way they've actually set it up. It looks very professional and neat, and there's good content. You mentioned it at study weekend. You had a look at that, and I'd actually never even heard of it. I don't know if you've seen it, AJ, the Tidings one, but yeah, you have to check it out. But no, it's another good resource to have a look at.
Yeah, this is not a paid advertisement by any means, but yeah, I'm not being sponsored to this post, but it's awesome because they update it regularly. They have really good little pithy articles as well. So it like they'll only take 2 or 3 minutes to read through. And the idea really is that you can read through it, and then hopefully I will like lock my phone and sit there and think about what I've just read about. They also release a really good magazine, so you can make a donation and get a print version, or you can just get a PDF one. But it's really professional. Like, it's probably one of the better publications that I've come across. And yeah, it's a great way to kind of train your mind. And unfortunately, as I said, I've become a bit slack, but talking about it even tonight, that'll reinvigorate me to think next time I open my phone to waste time, I first must go there. Because if anything else, it guilt trips me. Like, I start reading an article about God, about the Bible, and I'm like, I only open my phone to waste time. So now I'm going to stop. So that's kind of the little ways that I try to find time for God, I suppose.
I guess it's all good and well to talk about the standstill moments and, those moments of meditation, but how critical do you think it is to forming a relationship with God? Like, to get those moments, someone that immediately springs to mind is someone like John the Baptist, and obviously even Christ took time out in the wilderness to, I guess, have that time and space to form those relationships. But for us in, I guess, our day and age and our environment, how critical do you think it is?
I remember, I think it was Brother Neville Clark years ago in New Zealand did a talk, and I can't remember what the talk was, but I remember a line he said. He said, imagine what your relationship would be like if you didn't speak to your spouse every day. Like, there's no way you can build a functioning human relationship with someone that you're committed to if you're not talking to them every day, let alone, it should really be at least every hour, hopefully. But if you're not communicating regularly with God, you just can't build a functioning relationship. But we wouldn't expect that of humans, so why would our relationship with God be any different? So when you look at Christ, he is always surrounded by people in the Gospels, but there's numerous occasions. I think there's at least 6 or 7 occasions, and some of them might be double ups because one's in Mark and one's in Luke, but there's at least 6 or 7 occasions where it says that he departed into the wilderness to pray, or he went up into the mountain to pray. So that's quite instructive to me, because if the Son of God, who you would think had a fairly laser-like focus on matters of Scripture and of God, if he found the need to take himself away from the disciples and the hype of people needing healing, if he had to go up on a mountain to pray, then me and my age of distraction and busyness, then it has to be essential for me to do as well. So I was thinking about that today in the lead up to our chat as well, because I suppose my thought process is always evolving on this, because on one hand, I've kind of written off my ability to find an hour here and there, but it's probably not really good enough just to write that off. Like, thinking more deeply about how busy Christ was and yet the time he found to go into the wilderness. I guess wherever you are in life, you've got to try and find that time. It's just hard, and I don't want to just create platitudes like, all right, everybody, 1 hour a day, we're going to go off and do this, because I just wouldn't make that work consistently. So I'm trying to think of ways that you can practically make something work for every age.
Yeah, I found that, like, I'm just thinking about it now. I find that, like, with Christ, like, how much he needed it, it sort of makes you feel like, for yourself, how much more do I need it? And when you said it like that, just really, I guess, that just really hits home that. And even just being able to find those times that Christ in his life and in the trials and the anxieties that he had, he was able to make that time to do those things, like go out and have that time with God. And sometimes I find, just make excuses for myself, which I think is only natural, but admittedly not good enough. Yeah, that's really impactful. That's just really flicked a switch in my own mind when you said that.
I like the idea of relationship as well. Like, when you put it in that sort of language, it's in a relationship. It's not always something that you sort of necessarily force yourself to do. It's something that you talk to them all the time because you love them and you want to be with them, whether that's spouse, whether that's friends. And I think it's a similar thing with God as well. Sometimes you do find yourself getting into a position where it almost seems like it's something that you have to do. It's like, I need to do that because that's my goal. And then forget about the whole big picture that, no, this is the God who's the creator of the universe. And there's amazing things that he's done, working in our lives, and has brought about this plan of salvation for us. And often, like, I think when I find it helpful, even just looking outside, even just at the blue skies and the trees, and I sort of almost imagine God sort of looking down in this sort of, whatever city you're in, whether it's Newcastle or Adelaide or Sydney, and sort of almost seeing God in that and making it real. Because sometimes it can be more of a, I just need to do a reading because, that's my goal and that's going to be helpful. So seeing this relationship, I think, is quite good.
Yeah, and I think that the key part that I took away from that quote was that it's got to be something that's quite constant. So if I can just
quickly something that when you mentioned it before, something that immediately springs to mind is like the Psalm 1. That is something that instantly comes to my mind. It's like meditating on the Lord day and night. It sounds like very continual. It's not just some once-off occasion, and clearly that was evident in David's life. But being able to do it day and night and consistently, I think it's really important.
Yeah, spot on. Sorry, I've dug out a list of about eight or nine quotes where it says exactly that. So Psalm 1's the first one. Psalm 35 says, "My tongue shall speak of your righteousness all the day long." So there's, if you look up the word, the Hebrew word hagar, wherever it appears, it's often meditate or think or reason, or even to imagine. There's nearly always a time frame, and the time frame is not like a specific moment. It's all the day long. It's through the night watches. It's I meditate on all of thy work. So it's just like, for these people in the Old Testament, it was like this constant thing that was happening during the day. And I think probably their lifestyles led them to be able to do that a lot more easily than we can. That's not a cop-out or an excuse. It's just a reality. They lived lives that were, I'm sure they were busy, but they didn't have as many distractions as us. But that was the thing. They were kind of like in constant communication with God, just like you would be if you're trying to build a relationship with someone. So it's kind of not something we can reserve for half an hour at the end of the day when we're tired, because if you tried to run a relationship like that, you'd probably just end up, like drifting apart.
Yeah, definitely. And do you reckon, 'cause I was thinking about this a bit recently in terms of the idea of wilderness, even in the Bible, and there's, I guess, different situations where, I guess, Jesus went into the wilderness on multiple occasions, and it's probably something that he did consistently. But then there's other occasions where you hear like Paul or Elijah that sort of, it almost seems like a once-off thing. Like where they've actually, gone in, but regardless, it seems like it's a place of, I guess, transformation in that sense. So we just see that often it's probably more of a consistent thing, or something a bit more, if you spend a chunk of time out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I think the building a relationship has to be constant. So that's just the normal day-to-day communication. In the same way that is it a psalm or an Ecclesiastes, one or the other, that talks about a threefold cord not being quickly broken, and we have David saying, I meditate and when I wake up at the noon and when I go to sleep. So the constant reading and praying is the ongoing meditation relationship building that you have to have with God. But I think you're spot on about having a transformational wilderness time as well, because for John the Baptist, well, that was pretty much his whole childhood growing up in the wilderness. For Elijah, there was, I think it's at least 12 months at the brook Kerith. I'm pretty sure I tried to work out the time frame, and when you look at it, it's around about 12 months he spent in a bit of a wilderness place. Obviously, for Paul, I'm not quite clear on how long he spent in Arabia, but after he gets his sight back, he clearly takes himself off to Arabia to kind of recalibrate himself. And you would have thought that lying around for 3 days with no sight would have been a good enough amount of time. Like if I lay about for 3 days meditating when I was blind, I'd be right, all right, I'm done for the next year. But Paul then takes himself off into Arabia, which itself was a pretty epic journey to get there. So, it clearly, it's almost like some kind of detox for these guys where they could properly get out into the wilderness. How does that relate to us today? I don't really know on a practical level. I think if I took off to Broken Hill or somewhere like that for 3 months, I wouldn't be very popular when I got home. So I don't know what the I can see the principle, but I don't know how that works out in our lives. But I think those kind of things are what we're supposed to be grappling about, because even when we're sitting around in our busy lives thinking, how can I find time to just focus on God? Even that thought process gives glory to God, because you're filling your synapses with, how can I improve myself in a godly way? And even that gives him glory, even if you can't get out and do it for 3 months straight.
I like the point that you mentioned there as well, Josh, that I think what you've mentioned before is just that the whole idea of a wilderness place as well. It's not this destination. It's a period of time, even if it is, like you were saying before, Des, whether we don't necessarily have those big moments where we leave for 40 days or something like that, but it's using that and moving forward. And I especially like the idea that you mentioned earlier as well, is about murmuring. It's like the chewing the cud example just comes to my mind. Just being able to sit there and I find this personally on, even principles and topics that you don't necessarily understand at first, is just being able to mull it over in your head over and over and over again. I find then that the concept of it becomes a lot more ingrained in your mind. And then when you actually go out, I guess, into the real world, some of those principles that you have thought about, they're, I guess, a lot more conscious, and you're a lot more aware of things like that. I find, I actually read something today where I read 10% of what you hear, you actually remember after 2 weeks. And then it said, now I'm really annoyed at myself that I can't remember, but it was about 50 or 60%. It said when you then look at it again after 2 weeks, your brain remembered it then for another 2 more weeks. And then it became, I can't remember, it's really bothering me that I can't remember it, but the point of it was that if you revisit those points, and it was in the context of just learning intentions, if you revisit those points, they become so ingrained in your mind that you don't forget them, and they become a part of, I guess, in this context, what you are, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I think that's a very powerful point, because there's science to prove it as well. It's about the synapses in your brain, and the more often you're using those neural pathways, the more they go from being a little pathway through, dense bush. You're whacking through it. If you're doing that every day, you're eventually going to build a highway. And I think you see that, like you say, even if you read something and then reread it and then explain it to yourself aloud and then explain it to somebody else, you'll have a far better grasp of that concept than if you've just read it once while you're panic studying for an exam. And I find that proof even when I'm preparing for talks. Sometimes I try to ask the family to go out for a walk so I can pace around the house talking to myself aloud, not necessarily about what my actual talk is, but about the concept or the idea. So I did that for neuroplasticity. I wandered round and around the house without thinking about it, talking about neurons and neuroplasticity and how it all works. And I did that for at least 2 hours so that I could feel like I had the concepts in my head. And it wasn't until I actually stood up to do the talk that it occurred to me that I was, in a way, utilizing neuroplasticity. I was getting it into my head in different forms by reading it, by watching videos, by talking aloud, by explaining it to an imaginary friend. And that really allowed it to solidify in my head. And I think that's why biblical meditation is about murmuring and talking to yourself and muttering and even saying a prayer, because you can read a verse and then you can forget it in minutes. But if you say that verse aloud, and if you sing it or whatever you do, that's really going to stick it in your head a lot more. And that's what the science suggests as well. So that's why biblical meditation, I don't think it's about getting in a yoga pose and thinking about a flower opening and gazing up at the blue sky. It's about talking to yourself about God, about the scripture, and getting those words in your head and creating those neural pathways and then tramping up and down them every single day, so that you end up with the Bible in your brain. Because ultimately that's got to be the purpose of meditation. It's not to calm me down. It's not to make me feel good and squelch my toes in imaginary mud. It's to get the Bible inside my brain. That's the whole point of it. And so I think that's why muttering and murmuring is a key takeaway for me. And hopefully that'll inform me about the places that I need to go to be able to practice biblical meditation properly.
Yeah, and I know that one thing that got into a bit of a habit of doing was re-listening to talks that I'd just recently listened to, like in person. I often record whatever talk I'm listening to just on my phone, and then on the train at uni, I'd just, coming back, because I had like an hour, I'd just listen to the latest AYC talk, or youth group talk, or whatever it was, and I found there were certain concepts that later on would come up in conversation, and I remember someone said that from this talk here, and people going like, how on earth do you remember that? I'm like, I don't really know, but they just said that in the talk, and then it's probably just listening to it twice actually just reinforced a lot of those things, because I'd like an hour to kill coming back from uni. I'm like, well, why don't I just listen to one of those talks again? So even if you've got your own ecclesial recordings or things like that, definitely I'd recommend grabbing a hold of ones that you found really helpful, listen to them again, and it actually does make a big difference.
How like even talking about I was talking about earlier about developing a relationship in the wilderness, and I guess it is another whole concept in itself, but I find more importantly, and I guess my personal belief is that not that it is becoming more and more important, but the need for like prayer right now, I think we're just so dependent on God, and using those wilderness moments to really communicate with God. But finding like the reason why you also want to find time is to communicate with him and to be able to, I guess, unload your burdens, but just be able to communicate with God, and to, like he is your father figure and you have that ability to do that. But how important do you find that the role of prayer is in all of this as well?
Yeah, well, it's fundamental, I guess, because it's one of the two, it's a two-way relationship. So we're reading his word and meditating on it. And then at the same time, we are supposed to be communicating to him. I've always found it a funny, it's not a paradox, but a funny situation that God already knows what you're thinking, but he still wants to hear it from you. And if I can put it in the context of a relationship, you hopefully know that your spouse loves you, but you still want to hear them say that to you from time to time, and to verbalize what you know, or what they feel. And it's important to hear concepts like that verbalized. So I think that goes some way to explaining that God knows my innermost thoughts, but he still wants me to communicate it to him. You don't want it to be one of those one-way relationships where you've got a great friend, but they never say tickety-boo. They're just quiet all the time. I mean, they might be a great listener, but after a while, that's not great company. And likewise, you've got that friend who goes 90 to the dozen, but never lets you actually get your say in. So a good relationship, you're speaking, but you're making time to listen as well. And that analogy just sticks with me because it's easy to, I suppose, sit down and do the readings and do all the other stuff you do at nighttime, and then your head hits the pillow and you're out like a light. And it's like, well, actually, like God does want to hear from me, and he does want to hear my troubles and my worries, however menial they might be. So you're right, it is super important. And if there is, even though it might be hard to find wilderness time where it's peaceful and quiet, like all of us at some stage should be able to find time for a little prayer, even if it's a Nehemiah one, just a short one. But I think that talking out loud, that murmuring, that can be the form of a prayer as well. That could be an opportunity when you're praying. Like you might just be talking out loud about a concept and grappling with it, or you might use that opportunity to say an impromptu prayer to God. So I think that's absolutely critical.
I think just to wrap it up a little bit, because we're getting pretty close to almost 40 minutes now. Do you have, I guess, leading up to youth conference, as a part of just preparing for youth conference, we've obviously got this podcast, but do you have, I guess, a message or something that you want would be your best, I guess, putting you on the spot, your best piece of advice for people for preparing for conference, but even, I guess, to summarize some of the thoughts we've discussed tonight, like your take-home message?
I was thinking about this today, and I was trying to think, what would I say to my younger self without sounding too patronizing? And what I would say to my younger self is that 20-year-old or 23-year-old Des has the most time available right now that he'll ever have in his life. And it's also at a time when you're incredibly easily influenced, and a lot of the neural pathways that you're making in your brain will stick for life. So you're in this hugely formative period from, say, 16 to 24, when even though you think you have no spare time, you are the freest you will ever be in your entire life in that age. right?
Makes me feel really bad.
And uni exams and all that other stuff notwithstanding, you will never have more time than you have now from 16 to 24, just to pick some numbers. And so what you choose to do with your time actually scientifically does impact your brain. Like, it will actually develop who you are as a person, how you approach adversity in life, even what kind of intellect level you have, because neuroplasticity teaches us that you're not born with a set level of intelligence. You can increase your own intelligence. So they're such crucial formative years. And if I'm honest with myself, I think I spent a lot of my time in those years either mountain biking or playing FIFA football on my laptop. So that I spent a lot of formative time just wasting time. And anything I do now, it's much harder to kind of change who I am and to rewire my brain and to get more Bible in my brain. So I think that my take-home message to people is, if you're in that age gap of 16 to 24, like, just realize how important this opportunity is to develop yourself as a person and to develop yourself spiritually, because you have the opportunity to build a brain that's full of the Bible and that's going to be able to deal with adversity and make really good choices for your future life. But you want to make the most of it now, because you're never going to have more time to do that, and it will truly define you. And fortunately, I heard that message myself when I was younger, so I did take it on board. And between riding my bike and playing football, I definitely took that on board. But it's now that I'm at the other end, halfway to, 70 is biblically dead, and I'm halfway there. So, I still look back and think, man, I wish I'd done more though. So that's what I'd say to people. And yeah.
I think that's a really awesome way to end it. I think there's plenty there for people to take out of it. And for me personally, now that you've labelled my age demographic as for a call to action, thanks for that. Thanks very much, Des, once again. Appreciate it. And I know you've got kids to look after and keep asleep. So thanks for speaking to us in some of your spare time.
No worries. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much. Hope it's useful, and thanks heaps for asking.
Well, that was good, Josh. Good episode. I felt like, Des gave some really good insights into some of his thoughts around wilderness and meditation and even prayer there at the end. I thought that was, a good little thing to mention and discuss there at the end. What were yours? How did you feel about it?
Yeah, it was good to sort of talk through the ideas with someone else, and even what he was saying about the brain and repetition and going down those common paths, like you said, sort of hacking out a beaten track in the bush, which is sort of hard to do the first couple of times, but then once you've sort of made that the paths or highways in your brain, those patterns or habits become a lot easier to travel down.
Yeah, well, I found it kind of cool that you can practice neuroplasticity by learning about neuroplasticity. That was a cool little way of thinking about it. I guess he's given me the challenge, or both of us the challenge, considering we have so much time. So we need to start finding more time to do our challenge.
And Phil, you guys out there as well, within that younger age where Des sort of saying, grab hold of the time if you can. See if you can grab hold of some of those different resources around you that help you with it. So whether they be study notes for a particular conference or Bible camp, or even if it's talk recordings from your local ecclesia, or even just different study workbooks or whatever it is. Get onto them or different workshops that youth group is doing, because they'll be things that are really helpful and actually sort of kickstart you going down those sort of paths of thinking about God and that sort of thing. So
yeah, and I think for all our listeners out there, that's kind of a big reason why we wanted to do this podcast, is just to, in preparing for conference, make it one of those things where it's, hopefully we've given you one little thinky thing in the last 6 episodes where people can, or you guys listening can feel like you can mull over in your day and, I guess be an additional tool with the study notes as we're preparing for conference. So hopefully there's a few little hidden gems in there that you guys listening can think about in your day. There is also one other elephant in the room, Josh.
Oh, I think I know what it is. It's the socks.
It's the feet. It's the feet warmers, as I referred to them as.
Stand still in warm feet.
Actually, that's not bad. I don't mind that one. So yes, we are working towards some socks. Before Adelaide Youth Conference, we're working our way towards them.
I reckon even at this stage, it's going to be before the end of winter. So maybe, we're putting the order through, and we'll keep you guys posted very soon.
So maybe instead of your socks and your slippers in winter, your socks and slides in summer. I'm a fan of that. So
I can see that go down well.
So thanks to everyone once again for listening to another episode. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we did.
Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the thoughts and putting it into practice.
Thanks, Josh.
Cheers, EJ.
Thanks for listening to another Standstill episode, the official podcast of Adelaide Youth Conference 2023. To listen to past episodes, see highlight videos, and get all your podcast merch, visit our website. If this is your first time, welcome! You can find us everywhere you get your podcasts. The Standstill podcast is released once every month, so we can't wait to see you next time.